One of the boys, Ryan, cleared his throat. So, you're saying you were some kind of soldier? The man's lips curved into a faint smile. Not just a soldier, he said. I trained Navy SEALs, the best of the best. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Even Jason's eyes flickered with something. Uncertainty, maybe even respect, but he masked it quickly. So what? That was a long time ago, right? You're not out there fighting anymore. The man studied him for a long moment. No, I'm not, he said. But tell me something, kid. If you step into the ring with a fighter who's been trained his whole life, do you think he just forgets how to fight? Jason's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The man leaned back slightly. I may not be on the battlefield anymore, but the skills, the instincts, the mindset, those don't just disappear. He tapped his temple. It stays with you. And let me tell you something else. The strongest people you'll ever meet are usually the ones who don't need to prove it. A few of the boys glanced at each other. The weight of his words was settling in now, but Jason wasn't ready to back down. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and forced a laugh. Yeah, well, if you're so tough, why are you in that chair? A sharp silence followed. The other boys turned toward Jason, eyes wide, as if even they knew he had crossed a line. The man's face remained unreadable, but something flickered in his gaze. He looked down at his wheelchair, ran a hand over the worn armrest, then slowly lifted his eyes back to Jason. You really want to know? He asked. His voice was even, but there was something beneath it, something unshakable. Jason swallowed. He had expected the man to get mad, to snap at him, maybe even tell him to leave. But this was worse. The way the man looked at him, like he was seeing straight through him, made his stomach tighten. The man took a deep breath. I wasn't always in this chair, but sometimes life takes things from you. He paused, his fingers tapping against the metal frame. The real question is, what do you do after? Ryan spoke up, his voice quieter now. And what did you do? The man's eyes darkened slightly. I adapted, he said, and I kept going. Jason opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing to say to that. The man let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again. You boys walk around thinking strength is about who can push who around, who can talk the biggest game. But one day, you're going to realize that real strength, the kind that matters, has nothing to do with that. Jason looked away, suddenly very interested in the cracks on the pavement. The man's gaze swept over the group one more time before he leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. So tell me, which one of you actually understands what I'm saying? No one answered. The wind rustled the trees overhead. The world felt quieter somehow. And for the first time since they had walked up to him, the teenagers weren't laughing anymore. Jason shifted on his feet, his confidence unraveling. The man's words had sunk deep, but pride wouldn't let him admit it. He clenched his jaw, glancing at his friends, searching for backup. But none of them were laughing anymore. The usual bravado was gone, replaced by something else. Doubt, maybe even guilt. The way the man spoke, the way he carried himself, it didn't fit the image they had painted in their heads. The silence stretched too long. Jason hated it. He needed to take control again. So what? He muttered, kicking at a loose rock on the pavement. You want us to feel bad? Is that it? The man didn't flinch. He just stared at Jason, calm and unwavering. I don't want anything from you, he said, but you should ask yourself why you're the one getting defensive. Jason's face burned. He wasn't used to being the one put on the spot. Usually, he was the one making people uncomfortable, keeping the attention on everyone else. But this guy, he saw right through him. Ryan cleared his throat. We didn't know, he said quietly. We just thought. His voice trailed off, like even he wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. The man nodded. That's the thing about judging people before you know them. He tapped the side of his head. You assume things. You think you have it all figured out. But the world's a lot bigger than you think. A sharp gust of wind blew through the park, rattling the trees. Jason's fingers curled into fists, his heart pounding. He hated feeling small, and for the first time in a long time he did. But it wasn't because the man was mocking him. It was because, deep down, Jason knew he was right. The man shifted slightly in his wheelchair, his hands gripping the armrests. "You think this chair defines me?" His voice was calm but firm. "You think it makes me weak?" The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban park, where a group of teenagers gathered near the basketball court, laughing and shoving each other as they passed the time. They were the kind of kids who thrived on attention, always looking for the next joke, the next easy target. That's when they spotted him, a man sitting alone near a wooden bench, his wheelchair resting beside him. He looked older, but not frail, dressed in a simple jacket and worn jeans. A quiet presence. At first, it started with whispers, then snickers. One of the boys, Jason, nudged his friend and smirked. "Watch this," he muttered before walking over. The others followed, eager for a laugh. "Hey, old man," Jason called out, tilting his head mockingly. "What's the matter? Too tired to walk today?" The man didn't react at first. He simply looked up, his sharp blue eyes studying the kids in front of him. A slow breath. A slight shift in his seat. Encouraged by his silence, another boy chimed in. "Bet he just sits around all day, collecting checks. Probably never worked a real job." Laughter rippled through the group, but the man still didn't respond. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was who they were dealing with. This was no ordinary man. Decades ago, he had pushed his body to its absolute limits. He had endured grueling training, led some of the toughest warriors in the world, and faced situations these kids couldn't even imagine. He wasn't just a soldier. He was the one who trained the elite, the Navy SEALs. And while his legs might not work the way they used to, his mind was as sharp as ever. His strength, his discipline, his ability to assess a situation in seconds, it was all still there. He looked at the teenagers again, his expression unreadable. Then finally he spoke, and in that moment everything changed. The man's voice was calm, steady. "You boys got a lot to say," he said, his gaze sweeping over the group. "But tell me something, have you ever met someone who's been through real battles?" The laughter died down, but Jason rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure. My grandpa watches war movies. What's your point?" The man gave a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Movies." He let the word hang in the air for a moment. Then he shifted in his wheelchair, resting his hands on the armrests. "Let me tell you something about real battles." The teenagers exchanged glances. A few of them shuffled awkwardly, but no one walked away. There was something about the way he spoke, something that made it impossible to ignore him. "I was 18 when I signed up," he continued. "Thought I was tough. Thought I knew what the world was about. Then I stepped into my first day of training, and within an hour, I realized I didn't know a damn thing." The group was silent now. Even Jason, who had started all of this, found himself listening. The man glanced down at his hands, tracing a scar on his knuckle before looking back up. "I trained with the best. Men who could run for miles with nothing but their gear and willpower. Men who could hold their breath underwater longer than most people could dream of. And when it was time to fight, they fought like ghosts in the night. But it wasn't just about strength, it was about something bigger." He leaned forward slightly. "Discipline, honor, brotherhood. You don't make it out there without those things." One of the younger boys swallowed hard. "So, what happened to you?" The man exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. "War happened," he said finally. Jason shifted uncomfortably. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. They thought they were picking on some random old guy, but this was different. The man studied their faces, his gaze lingering on Jason the longest. "You think strength is about who can talk the loudest?" he asked. "You have no idea what real strength is." And with that, he fell silent, waiting. The teenagers stood there, shifting on their feet. The energy had changed. What started as a joke now felt like something else, something heavier. Jason folded his arms, trying to keep his usual cocky smirk, but it wasn't working. The man wasn't reacting the way he expected. He wasn't getting angry, wasn't telling him to leave. He was just watching. Jason opened his mouth, but the man didn't let him speak. "I've seen real weakness," he continued, his gaze locked onto Jason's. "And it's not about how strong your body is. It's about how strong your mind is. And right now, you've got a choice to make." Jason's throat felt dry. "What? What choice?" he muttered. The man leaned forward slightly. "You can walk away from this moment, pretend it never happened. Keep acting like the world owes you something. Or," he let the word hang in the air, "you can start thinking about the kind of man you actually want to be." The weight of those words settled over the group. No one moved. No one spoke. Jason's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, the man reached down. His fingers gripped the wheels of his chair, and as the tension in the air thickened, he did something none of them expected. He pushed himself forward. And in that moment, Jason felt something he had never felt before. Fear, but not of the man. Fear of what he might see in himself. Jason felt his pulse hammering in his ears as the man pushed himself forward, his movements slow but controlled. It wasn't just the action itself, it was the way he did it. With purpose, with quiet confidence. Like a man who had nothing to prove, yet somehow proved everything in the span of a few seconds. The group stood frozen, eyes locked on him. Then, just as Jason thought the tension couldn't get any heavier, the man stopped and did something none of them expected. He lifted his legs, both of them, just slightly off the footrests. The motion was brief, but undeniable. Ryan sucked in a breath. "Wait, what?" he muttered under his breath. Jason blinked, his mind racing. You. Jason felt his stomach drop. These weren't regular guys. They carried themselves like soldiers, like men who had seen things. The man in the wheelchair turned slightly, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Right on time," he murmured. Jason's breath caught in his throat. "Wait, what's happening?" One of the uniformed men approached, nodding respectfully to the man in the wheelchair. "Sir," he said, "your ride is ready." Jason's chest tightened. Asterisk, asterisk, sir, asterisk, asterisk. The man gave a slight nod before turning back to Jason and the others. "Like I said," he murmured, "people love making assumptions." Then, with surprising ease, he pushed himself up from the wheelchair. Jason's breath hitched. He watched, stunned, as the man, asterisk, asterisk, the same man he had mocked, underestimated, and doubted, asterisk, asterisk, stood up, steady and strong. Jason's mind reeled. You can walk." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Not the way I used to," he admitted, "but I never stopped moving forward." Jason felt a lump in his throat. Everything, asterisk, asterisk, everything, asterisk, asterisk, he thought he knew about this man had just been flipped upside down. The uniformed man handed the veteran a cap, embroidered with an emblem Jason didn't recognize. But he understood enough to know that this wasn't just any soldier. This was someone important, someone respected, someone real. As the veteran took the cap and adjusted it on his head, he glanced back at Jason one last time. "Strength isn't about proving yourself to others," he said. "It's about knowing who you are, even when no one's watching." Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the SUV. The engine rumbled to life. The door was shut, and just like that, he was gone. Jason stood there, staring at the empty spot where the wheelchair had been. The weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on him. For the first time in a long time, Jason had nothing to say. And for the first time ever, he realized he had a lot to learn. The parking lot felt eerily quiet after the SUV disappeared down the road. Jason stood frozen, his thoughts tangled in ways he couldn't quite explain. The man, the one he had mocked, underestimated and dismissed, had turned out to be someone he could never have imagined. Someone who had seen real battles, who had trained the toughest soldiers in the world, and yet carried himself with more patience and wisdom than anyone Jason had ever met. Ryan exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. Dude, that just happened, right? No one answered. They all felt it. The shift. The weight of everything the man had said still hung in the air. Jason swallowed hard. He wanted to shake it off, to act like none of it mattered, but he couldn't. He had spent years